Welcome to the first episode of the Ancient Greece Unveiled podcast. This episode will be covering the evolution of the military and its tactics in the ancient Greek world, namely from the Bronze Age up to the Hellenistic Period. So let's start off with the Bronze Age, which spanned from approximately 3000 to 1200 BCE. The early and middle Bronze Age was dominated by the Cycladic society and the Minoan civilization. Now, the Minoan civilization was not very militaristic, so there is not much information about their combat tactics and styles of the time. The Late Bronze Age, however, also known as the Mycenaean period, is where we find much more information. The Mycenaeans were a militant people whose reputation was built through war. They called themselves the Achaeans, and Mycenae would come to dominate most of ancient Greece and the Aegean Sea. Their military force was mainly based on infantry, chariots, and support archers. Early Mycenaean soldiers were equipped with a large spear, a tower shield, a helmet, with the most common being the boar tusk helmet, limited body armor, and a sword for close quarters combat. Officers wore helmets of bronze or boar tusk, corsets of bronze plate, and bronze greaves. The leader of the military force was the Wanax, the warrior king. Exactly how the army was run is not known at this time. What is known is that to support the infantry, chariots would be used to carry archers or as heavy charging units. There were also horse-mounted warriors, but their use was very limited and was reserved for only high-class warrior elites to showcase their status. The Mycenaeans also had a naval fleet. This was mainly designed for quick deployment and landing of soldiers. As the period wore on, the infantry would be equipped with heavy bronze body armor. The tower shield became less popular and soldiers were equipped with the figure 8 shield. This would become the most common shield during the late Bronze Age. Towards the end of the Mycenaean period, the infantry would go through another series of changes. The heavy bronze armor would be replaced by a lighter scale armor, and the soldiers would be supplied with lighter spears and swords to increase mobility. The figure 8 shield would also come to be replaced by the smaller proto-diplon shield. We will now move to the Iron Age, also known as the Dark Ages, that spanned from approximately 1200 to 700 BCE. This new age was caused by the collapse of Mycenaean Greece as well as other major powers around the Mediterranean. So, with the societal and economic collapse came new opportunities for certain groups, especially militarily powerful ones. This increased instability, but also increased regional mobility. Iron started being forged, and while it didn't completely replace bronze weapons and armor, it would be used for at least parts of this equipment. Bronze was more valuable than iron, so bronze equipment became more common with higher class warriors. As time went on, iron weapons would become more common. With the monarchies of the Mycenaeans gone, new community development emerged. Eventually, small communities would start consolidating, leading to the formation of city-states by the end of the Iron Age. With the new societal structure came a new style of warfare. This new development based warfare in a group of heavily armed infantry organized in what was called a phalanx formation. This was a large contrast to how battles had been fought in the early Iron Age. You see, aristocrats had controlled the battlefield, fighting heroic duels in front of large crowds. The adoption of this new fighting style was dawned the Hoplite Revolution, and would start in the late Iron Age and bleed into the Archaic Age, where hoplites and their military tactics would become most famous. Continuing into the Archaic Age, which spanned from approximately 700 to 480 BC, the Hoplite Revolution was in full effect. The invention of equipment, such as the double-handled hoplite shield, was a large component in the phalanx being adopted, relying on close quarters formations and group cooperation. Hoplites developed new unwritten rules on the battlefield that led to contests of honor and status, not just survival. Traditionally, hoplites are described being equipped with the round hoplite shield, which had a bronze armband where the soldier inserted his arm, and then a leather hand grip to hold, placed right before the rim. The hoplon protected its user much better to the left than to the right. For this reason, when armies met, they would push to their right side, trying to collapse the enemy's left, usually putting the best warriors on this side to lead the push and break through. Each soldier relied on the man to their right to be their main source of protection. Hoplites were also traditionally equipped with a thrusting spear, about 8 feet long, a sword as a secondary close quarters weapon, a bronze helmet, most commonly the Corinthian, a bronze breastplate, and bronze shin guards. It has been thought that this is not actually true for all hoplites, though, since they were responsible for acquiring their own equipment other than the Spartan hoplites, since their military was funded by the city-state. It seems only more wealthy hoplites had all bronze armor, while others most likely wore armor made from organic materials like linen or leather. This extends to helmets as well, with many hoplites wearing leather caps, and some poorer men may have had to even wear felt caps known as pilos. In battle, the opposing sides would engage in a pushing match after a brief spear thrusting. When one of the sides collapsed, that was usually the end of the battle. It was seen as very dishonorable for a soldier to retreat, since it would require him to throw down his shield to flee. The phalanx was the centerpiece of these conflicts, detailed as a close-knit formation in which soldiers stood 2 to 3 feet apart and then would condense when being pushed. They could have supporting chariots and archers, and rock or javelin throwers, although this wasn't as common since it was not as efficient as the infantry. The formation would be coordinated and move at the sound of a flute to ensure that the group would move in unison. For all the descriptions of the phalanx being disciplined through battle, it has been thought more recently that this is not necessarily true. It seems the phalanx started out coordinated, but when the enemy was reached, the fighting usually would break into smaller skirmishes and individual clashes. You see, most hoplites were farmers with informal military training who lacked the discipline necessary to stay in a strong formation. These tactics were used during the Persian Wars, only continuing their popularity in the Greek victories over the Persians. Now, leading into the classical period that spanned from approximately 480 to 323 BCE, the Persian Wars were still being fought, but would soon come to an end in the mid-5th century. Not only had the Greeks won due to their successful ground tactics, utilizing the phalanx formation, but also due to the large navy that the city-states, mainly Athens, had built up. Not long after the Persian Wars came the Peloponnesian Wars, mainly fought between Athens and Sparta. Battle tactics did not evolve much during this conflict, but Athens did prefer to fight Sparta with its navy since it was their advantage over the strong Spartan infantry. Siege warfare had also been adopted at this time and would be used to try to starve out cities into submission. However, this was not a very successful strategy during the early classical period. After the Spartan victory of the Peloponnesian War at the end of the 5th century, the Corinthian War starts soon after at the start of the 4th century. This would pit Sparta against Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos. Sparta's enemies would increasingly utilize peltasts, javelin throwers that wore minimal to no armor and utilized a small wicker shield called a pelte. Peltasts were formed into groups and had much more mobility and range than hoplites. When serving with hoplites, they would be positioned on the flanks of the phalanx. Sparta never adopted these peltasts and would eventually be defeated due to this lack of evolution. The hoplite phalanx was still the most popular, but pairing it with a more mobile force proved to be more successful. In the mid-4th century, Macedonia would grow in power under Philip II. He would make reforms to the phalanx, innovating his army. Each member would wear a metal helmet, carry a shield and short sword, and be equipped with a large 18-foot-long pike called a sarissa. These innovations would counter the hoplites' ability to fight in close quarters. Philip would also pioneer the use of torch and catapults. This would make siege warfare much more successful and contribute to both Philip's and Alexander the Great's large-scale conquests. Under Philip II, Macedonia would expand into Greece with his new tactics. You see, before Philip's innovations, the use of cavalry and more mobile multi-weapon warfare had been growing more popular, pairing well with his new phalanx. After Philip II's death in 336 BCE, Alexander III, who would come to be known as Alexander the Great, would come to rule in Macedonia. He would continue Philip II's conquest, coming to control all of Greece and then looking to expand eastward. He would eventually take Asia Minor, Egypt, and fight against the Persian Empire. Alexander the Great vastly increased the size of his empire using the tactics that had been innovated upon by Philip II. Although things became more difficult in Central Asia, where the Macedonians encountered guerrilla warfare used by nomadic tribes there. After a long campaign, Alexander and his army finally turned back, ending the expansion of the largest empire in the ancient world up to that point. By the time Alexander the Great would die in 323 BCE, most soldiers were mercenaries, no longer the hoplite-like figures from before the empire's expansion. Now in the Hellenistic period, spanning from about 323 BCE to 32 BCE, we would see further advancements in warfare. The Greeks mainly would continue with the existing tactics, but advance them with larger mercenary armies, more diversity in arms, advancements in mechanics of war such as siege weapons, and larger ships. Warfare would become very technical and be performed by professionals. The Roman Empire would take these Greek military strategies and further innovate upon them, eventually coming to rule over Greece in the 2nd century BCE. Now this ends our look at the evolution of the military tactics and fighting styles of ancient Greece from the Bronze Age to the Hellenistic period. Thank you for listening.